What's up, everybody? I'm TJ.
And I'm Kelsey, and we are
the Nashville Wine Duo. It's always good. We're here. We're ready for another podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited. We have a very fun guest on today.
Our first food truck of Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
We're excited.
Very excited.
And it's seafood, so you love seafood.
Obsessed with seafood.
Obsessed. What's your favorite seafood?
Oh my God. I like it all. I love crab. I love shrimp. We were just talking before this about how my dad, he's a fly fishing guide. So trout is like, when you have like fresh trout, it's just incredible. But that's what I love about seafood. It's very unique in like, you know, how like fish and everything from the sea, like depending on where it is, it takes up whatever environment it's in.
Absolutely.
Like all animals, I guess. But it's interesting how you can have the same fish, but different places. But whatever they're getting from the water and the nutrients, it tastes different.
Can drastically change.
But I love it. All kinds.
Okay, so I have to introduce that infamous voice that you just heard.
Yes.
So we have a special guest, Carlin Perez. South Coast Seafood is our guest on this week's podcast. And we're so happy to have you, man.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
I'm excited to be here. Excited to do this.
We want to know everything about the food truck world.
Well, let's first start out.
Well, yes. Okay. But I mean, I'm really intrigued. At one point back in the day, we kind of talked about doing some kind of like food truck thing, and then as we started like investigating and like we're like no.
This is a lot of money.
It's not cheap.
No.
It's not cheap, I'll say that.
It's not for the faint of heart. Well, let's start out. Why don't you just tell us your story, like your background and how you led up to today and having this food truck and what you're doing.
Sure. Yeah. So technically I was born in Braithwaite, Louisiana, which is southeast of New Orleans. It's about an hour southeast. It's in Plaquemines Parish. If you look at a map of Louisiana, Louisiana looks like a boot, right? So we're the toe of that boot. If you look at a map, you'll see a thin strip of land on the southeast corner of Louisiana that runs out into the Gulf of Mexico. That whole strip of land is Plaquemines Parish. The special thing about our parish is that it actually has more water than it does land. It has almost 70% water and 30% land. So that's how small that community is down there, and it's literally nothing but fishermen.
And what it's
Plaquemines.
Plaquemines.
Plaquemines. Yeah, so there's actually a Plaquemine, Louisiana, which is by Baton Rouge, and that's without an S. And then there's Plaquemines, which is the entire parish. And so parish being the same thing as like a county in anywhere else.
Yeah.
And so our crawfish farm is on the east bank. So if you follow the river down, there's the east bank and the west bank, and everything on both sides of the river is everybody says up the road or down the road, because there's only one road on both sides of the river. That's how secluded it is. So So if you're somewhere and the gas station is up the road, you know, that's how everybody refers to it as. It's either up the road or down the road. And so on the east bank of Plaquemines is where our crawfish ponds are, and I grew up there, went to school in New Orleans because, there's so many people. Plaquemines is so small. I mean, there's literally probably 500 or less people in the entire parish.
Wow.
It's tiny. And so I went to school in New Orleans, and then my parents bought a house in New Orleans to be closer to the schooling system there. And then on weekends, we would go down to what we called Stella. And Stella was the place where our crawfish ponds are. And then also, just some marshland. It was kind of just, kind of like a farmhouse that we would go play around at. And so every weekend, that's where we would go. And then as a kid, we only had 2 crawfish ponds. And we would harvest around 300 or 400 pounds a day, which sounds like a lot. That's like nothing compared to like a lot of the other bigger farms in central Louisiana. And so really as kids, it was more just for fun. We would go catch crawfish. My dad, we would sell them, but it was just so little that you didn't make a ton of money. But so our dad would pay us 10 cents by the pound for every pound of crawfish that we caught. And so he didn't have to run the traps. He would send us out, and we loved it. It was just fun. And so, we would go catch crawfish. He'd pay us 10 cents a pound. And then my brother, who's older than I am, would run them up to the nearest fish market and sell them there. And so, and that's kind of, my early childhood, how it all started. And, for the most part, we would always have, an unlimited supply of crawfish for our family. So we would eat crawfish a lot, at least 3 times a week. We would either be boiling crawfish, and then anything we didn't eat when we boiled them, we would peel and make etouffee or jambalaya or whatever, with the, extra crawfish tails.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was the young childhood, I'd say probably before 12 and under. And then as we started kind of growing, we gained a reputation for having pretty good crawfish, just because we were able to kind of let ponds rest where we weren't as busy. Whereas a lot of the larger farms, they're constantly harvesting and, every day. And so when I say we were small and at 300 or 400 pounds a day, these guys were harvesting 10 to 11,000 pounds a day.
So yours was a better quality because you weren't doing that as
exactly. Much? Yeah. We weren't catching everything that we could catch and sell it, where these guys, they're selling so much that they're just catching everything. And so, that allowed us to kind of get bigger crawfish. We would let our ponds rest, and we didn't pressure them. It wasn't something, it was just a side job. It was never anything that was serious. So we could kind of let our ponds rest and say, hey, we can let them rest for 3 weeks and catch selects, and then we'll make a little bit more money on the selects rather than, our regular field run, and they'd be bigger, which, you can make anywhere between 25 to 50 cents more a pound on those selects. And so that's, that was where it all began. And then from there, we kind of just kept doing that as a side job. And then after Hurricane Katrina, the federal government came in and built a flood wall around New Orleans, which saved New Orleans from getting flooded, which was great. But what it did was then it diverted all the water that would go into New Orleans onto us. And so Hurricane Isaac, which is a hurricane that nobody knows about, came in, and my dad intentionally bought that property because it was high ground and it had never flooded. And then when Hurricane Isaac came in, we had 15 feet of water in our house.
Dang.
So yeah,
because of the way they built that
exactly,
wall.
exactly.
Wow.
And the thing was, the federal government, they're like, why are we going to build this wall that far down south if there's only 400, 500 people there? It wasn't worth the extra 70, 80 million dollars of building that wall further down to only protect that many people. And so it was devastating, to say the least. This was like our, most people have their vacation homes being like a lake house or something like that. It's your little happy place where you get away. That was Stella to us. It was our happy place where we got away from to go just, be in the outdoors. So when that happened, it was devastating. We thought we were going to sell everything. We thought it was over with. And the land down there is pretty much worthless. It's basically just a bunch of marshland. Nobody's really going to buy that. And then especially now with that flood wall going up, it was absolutely worthless because no one was going to buy and build a house down there, because you knew that you were in a serious area that could be impacted by flooding. So after that happened, we held on to it for a little while, and we were waiting to hear if the parish was going to try to rebuild the back levees. And so you have your front levees that run across the river, and then you have your back levees that basically keep the marsh water from coming in. And that is what flooded us in Hurricane Isaac. And so those levees needed to be built up, and those are all built with dirt and clay. And so we had heard that maybe the state was going to come in and start building those back levees up. And we knew that they were going to need dirt for that. And we had a lot of land. We had 1,500 acres, but again, it was all pretty much, worthless land. And so we kept our fingers crossed. Sure enough, they ended up, saying that they were going to do this project. And so we put in a bid, and the property just happened to be directly, the levees just happened to be like literally directly behind our property.
Wow.
Like you could throw a rock and hit the levee from our property line. And so we were saving them an astronomical amount in trucking fees. The biggest thing was clay deposits. You need a lot of clay deposits so the soil will stick and not fall apart when it gets wet. And so that was the next big thing, was we have to test the soil and find out if we have the right clay deposits. That was a very stressful time. We had lots of people coming out and testing our soil, making sure we had the right clay deposits, and we were just fingers crossed the whole time. Sure enough, we had the right clay deposits, and it was an absolute godsend for us.
Wow.
And so what we did is we told the state, like, hey, you absolutely come in and take our dirt, but you're not just going to dig a big hole and leave us with this massive crater on our property, you know? And this is all credit to my brother. He's an attorney. He's very whatever business savvy. And he was like, hey, why don't you come in and build us some crawfish ponds? And why don't you make them all 15 acres apiece? And one is going to be higher than two, and two is going to be higher than three, so that everything, we don't have to pay for pumps. Everything will run by gravity. And it all worked out, and we were saving them so much money. They were like, cool. Yeah, sounds
wow.
good. No problem. Like we didn't even have to twist their arm. It was awesome. And so again, all credit to him. That was his mastermind project, and it worked out great. And so we went from having 2 ponds that were maybe 15 acres, to having, 22 ponds that are all now around 25 acres. And so we went from harvesting 300 or 400 pounds a day to harvesting 4,000 pounds a day.
Wow.
And all because of like this really bad thing that ended up turning really good.
Yeah. And it's a great example of, a blessing in disguise.
Yeah.
You want to talk about like sad, like that was the lowest of the low when we went down after Hurricane Isaac and saw the devastation. I mean, we had mud probably 2 inches thick in the bottom floor of the house. And there was blue crabs crawling in our house, dead fish, all kind of stuff. I mean, it was crazy. Crawfish too.
And nobody comes to help you clean that up.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope. Yeah. We did it all ourselves. I have 2 sisters as well. So we all put on what people call shrimping boots. They're just knee-high white boots, and got in there with shovels and shoveled out all the mud and got it all cleaned up. I mean, it took almost 2 years to get everything, pretty much back to normal. But we had a citrus farm as well. And what not a lot of people think of when they think of flooding is that the amount of chemicals that are in the water. Everybody down there has, whatever, let's say 409 or bleach or whatever in their house, just sitting at the bottom floor underneath their sink. Well, all that stuff gets picked up and the bottles open and all that stuff gets in the water. And then when the water level drops, all that stuff ends up in the soil. So we had a lot of orange trees, which oranges was more of my dad's like side project. He just liked doing it. Very good soil, obviously being on the east bank of the Mississippi. And so it killed all of our trees. It killed like 2,000 orange trees. And completely, like, there was no saving them. You couldn't save them. So we got tractors and popped them all up out of the ground. And then we were left with just this big open field. But again, a great blessing in disguise. It was one of those things that, just thankfully worked out.
Wow.
That's such a cool story.
Thank you.
So then how'd you go from, then it was like, let's make this like a really big business, right? Because now we have enough to kind of make this bigger.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. And so the plan was never to move to Nashville and start something up here. It was more or less, honestly, the crime rate in New Orleans is what got me up here in a short amount of time. I think it was like 2 years. I got held up a couple times, 3 times total.
Just at gunpoint?
Yeah, at
Wow.
gunpoint. And I was like, forget this, I'm out of here. And so I first moved to Austin, Texas, thinking that maybe I'd like that. And it was all right. But I was like, well, let me go try. I lived there for like 2 weeks, just stayed in a hotel. And I was like, let me go try Nashville, and moved to Nashville. And it only took me a week of staying in a hotel where I was like, I think this is, the place where I want to be. And so I ended up getting an apartment. And again, like, never thought about doing crawfish at that point. Honestly, I think I lived in Nashville for a year, and I was craving some crawfish, and I went to somebody and got some boiled, and they, weren't the greatest boiled in the world. And so I was like, okay, like, this is, and they had like a line around the block. I was like, oh man, well, this is like, might be an opportunity. I was like, well, maybe they have good live, and they just don't know how to boil. And so I went and got live, and like half the sack was dead, and they still had a line around the block. And I was like, oh man, this is just like, we can really do something here. And so that's when I decided to start South Coast. And the funny part, it was originally called Swamp Donkeys.
Swamp
Donkeys. Yeah. So in Louisiana, there's a reason for the name. So in Louisiana, when you catch like a big fish or whatever, anything that's big out in the swamp, you call it a swamp donkey. If it's a really big redfish, man, look at the swamp donkey that I caught, whatever. And so I was like, well, we have big crawfish, we'll call it swamp donkeys. And so I started Swamp Donkeys as an LLC, and I started doing boils for some of my friends. And then soon enough, like, restaurants started calling us about crawfish. And I was like, man, I think we need a little bit more professional name than Swamp Donkey. So I started the DBA, South Coast Seafood, and that's what we ended up working under was South Coast. And then we started, doing some business with restaurants, which really helped out. And so we decided to try and do, some other seafood as well, since we were already driving back and forth anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is that, the white tablecloth restaurants in Nashville have great seafood. They do. But the more mom and pop shops, and I understand because like Gulf shrimp, they're expensive. You're paying for a guy to go out and on his boat that costs $400,000 or whatever, his trawler,
Mm-hmm.
and then paying for his hourly wage plus his gas to go out. And sometimes they go out for a week at a time and live out on the boat and then come back in. So Gulf shrimp are going to be significantly more expensive than imports. And what I found is basically, smaller restaurants in Nashville didn't want to pay the price for Gulf seafood, which I understand. And so the whole wholesale side of things, we basically were only successful with crawfish, and which, there's not a whole lot of crawfish that get eaten in Nashville. It's not New Orleans where pretty much every restaurant is serving crawfish.
Mm-hmm.
Up here, there's only a finite amount that do crawfish. So we had to find another way to make money off of crawfish. And so we decided to start a food truck. And the first year was okay. It wasn't great by any means, but it was okay. And I think, it just took a while for people to hear about us and hear our story and obviously test our quality. It's hard and I completely understand this. It's hard for people in Tennessee, especially Louisiana residents who moved to Tennessee, to believe that you can get good crawfish in Tennessee.
Right.
Totally makes sense. And so it took a while. It took about 2 years for us to really get our name out there and for people to understand that we brought a great quality of crawfish, that we owned our own ponds, that, we were taking them straight from our ponds and bringing them up here, which is huge in the crawfish industry, because every time you move crawfish from one truck to another, which is usually done by hand, you get a 5% dead loss. The crawfish are they're pretty resilient,
Mm-hmm.
but they get stressed out easily, and especially very weather dependent. So if you have a cold front, it will trigger the crawfish to molt, and they molt because they're getting a thicker shell as a better insulator to, protect them from the cold weather. And so when that happens, when they molt, they get soft shells, and they basically get crushed very easily. And when you're talking about a bunch of 35-pound sacks all stacked on top of one another, that can hurt your survival rates. And so, that's where we kind of, I think, really gained a lot of notoriety, was for our live ratios. And we obviously know a lot about crawfish, and we, like, when our ponds were built, we dealt directly with Louisiana Department of Agriculture and the LSU Department of Agriculture. They basically guided us. Hey, this is what you need to plant. This is what you need to do with your crawfish in order to make them survive better, to make them healthier. Plant rice, it's a better food source, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So we learned a lot through them. And so we knew, hey, there was a cold front. We don't want to stack sacks too high. We're only going to stack them 3 high instead of 7 high because they're going to crush easy. And so that was, that knowledge allowed us to keep our survival rates pretty high. And so, that's really where I think where we made a name for ourselves, is our survival rates. And with crawfish, that makes a huge difference. Not just obviously when you're selling them live to another customer, but also how they taste. If you have half a sack of dead crawfish, even if you pick out all the live ones are still going to taste a little fishy because they've been sitting in there with all those dead crawfish.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So at what point did you decide, okay, we're getting a truck? We're doing this.
So I actually had a guy from New Orleans. He was a buddy of mine I went to high school with, and he moved up on a whim to Nashville, and he worked in the restaurant industry his entire life, straight out of high school. And so he moved up here and asked if he could live with me. I was like, yeah, sure. And he had all this restaurant experience. I knew nothing about running a restaurant, never wanted to run a restaurant. And so he tried to get me to open a restaurant. I was like, absolutely not. I'm never doing that. Not that it's bad, so much respect for the people that do it. It's just so much work that I'm like, I just can't, I can't do it. And so long story short, we talked about it, and I was like, you know what, I think we can do this. We can be successful with this. And so I had him run the whole thing. And obviously I was there to help, when we first started. But he ran the whole thing, and then he had to move back to New Orleans, unfortunately. And so when he moved back, everything got put on my shoulders, and I was like, oh gosh, I don't know what I'm doing here. And so, but I learned, I learned through him, and he taught me a lot. And by that time, we had met people, the restaurants that bought our crawfish, and I asked them for advice and all that kind of stuff. So, and then, and that was when we decided to actually move forward with it. And like I said, I mean, that was year one. And by year three, we had realized, like, okay, this is going to be something that we could, that's worth the work. Because crawfish boiling, I mean, it takes some work. You have to wash the crawfish, and I mean, it's all their little claws stick out. So when you're carrying the sacks, they'll scrape you up pretty good, like really good, like draw blood.
Wow.
And so it's tough work, and obviously in the late spring, summertime, it's hot, and you're out in the sun all day long boiling crawfish next to a very hot pot. So you burn a lot of calories, put it that way.
Yeah.
And so,
and by the time you're done, you're ready to eat a bunch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, we realized that the work was worth it. And so, I will say this: year two, I almost gave up. I almost sold the trailer. I have a buddy in Louisiana who runs a very successful catering company, and he offered to buy me the trailer from me, because I talked to him. I was like, man, this is miserable. Like, we're not making much money. It's so much work. But he's like, all right, I'll buy it from you. No problem. Because he needed one anyway for his catering company. And for whatever reason, I have no idea why, I was just like, you know what? Like, let's just give it one more year. And year three was when we really saw, a growth, and saw that it was worth it.
What year was that?
So I guess that would have been 2019. So
what do you attribute to the change?
I think it was just word of mouth.
Yeah.
Word of mouth. It's funny that, we reached out to so many different, like the Nashville scene and different magazines. And again, it's just like, oh, this random guy's reaching out to us about crawfish. Like, we're not going to, do that story, which I don't blame them, but we didn't have any kind of, anybody pushing our name, anybody, covering our story, telling our story, or anything like that. So it was all word of mouth, and basically people saying, hey, I got these crawfish from this guy, and they're really good.
That's how we came about you. We were talking before we got on this. We met with a new friend. We had some wine, and she was just talking about some of her favorite places to eat.
And she was from Louisiana.
Yep. And I just mentioned how much I love seafood, and she just mentioned y'all. And I was like, okay, we need to reach out, because I find it, I have a really hard time, like what you're saying. I have a really hard time finding seafood where I'm not paying an arm and a leg in order for it to taste good. And obviously it's because of where we're located. We're in Tennessee. We're not by any kind of, big amount of water that's not like dirty like the Cumberland River. So it's hard to find fresh, good seafood. And when you are getting it, you're paying a lot of money. And that's always what I miss about when I go to Florida a lot, or when I go to Michigan, or when I visit my dad in Colorado. It's like, it's just not accessible. So I was like, oh, like this girl, you can tell she's had, I could trust her opinion. And when she said y'all were really good, and I'm like, oh, and it's like a food truck, like that's pretty cool, And so that's why I was like, we need to find out this story, and obviously come to your food truck too. But if I'm being honest, I've never had crawfish. I've had a lot of shrimp, but I work with a couple ladies at Trader Joe's. Actually, we have a lot of them from Louisiana.
There's a lot of Louisiana people in Nashville.
Yeah.
There is, thankfully.
And they go on and on about the food from Louisiana. And my sister lived in Baton Rouge for a little while, but we never tried crawfish. When I went to visit her, it was a very short amount of time. But the people from Louisiana, like, I really feel like it is like, there's certain states there's things about states where like they're unique for that state. But when I meet people from Louisiana, it's a culture. It is a lifestyle. It's proud culture. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're very proud from being from Louisiana. And there's very unique things that you can only find in Louisiana. And from what you're saying, it's like the crawfish are very unique to this area of the South. And it sounds like they're very temperamental. So if anybody were to try to do it in a different area, then it probably wouldn't work out, because they wouldn't like the climate or the soil, whatever is going on there. So like they were meant to be in that area. And so again, it's like a lot like wine. We talk about wine, where it's called the terroir with wine, and wherever you grow, like maybe Cab grows in this area really, really, really well. Well, if you try to grow it Cab in this other area, like here, it's not going to work out, and you're going to have to do so many things to make it work out. And even then you're just never going to get a very good product. So, when you go to a certain place, you get that where it's best, where it lives best, where it grows best, where it thrives, you will get the best product. So I think it's pretty cool that we're not too far from there. It's not like you're making this travel for a very long period of time. So I just think it's really cool to hear you saying we're getting this product from where it thrives, and it's not traveling too far, and a lot about it. So that's why I think it's gotten as successful as it has, because it's good.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And I mean, you hit the nail on the head there that, with, as far as doing, cause we had thought about possibly well, what could we do ponds up here? I don't know. And really it's the soil and the weather. Those are the two biggest things. It's such a rocky soil here that you can't, it's hard to dig a pond that big. You'll have to probably blast some rock and stuff like that. But two, with the weather, it gets so cold that this crawfish are going to burrow too deep to where basically they won't be able to find their way back up.
Right.
And so, I've done a lot of research on crawfish up here. And did you know that y'all actually have a crawfish that's only native to Nashville? Or maybe not Nashville, maybe Tennessee. Yeah,
Oh.
it's called I can't remember the exact name, but I think it's called the Tennessee crawfish or Nashville crawfish or something like that. But yeah, it's only native to this area.
Interesting.
It looks similar to what a white river crawfish would be. And we do have white rivers in Louisiana, but another great example of you talk about quality and the difference in, species. I forget, there's several hundred different species of crawfish. But in Louisiana, white rivers, red swamps, those are your two main ones. Well, in Louisiana, most people won't eat white rivers. They don't enjoy them. They have a green, what most people will call the fat, which is actually something else. It's I forget the exact name of it, but it's the liver of the crawfish. It serves the same purpose. Well, white rivers have a green liver, and it has a very fishy taste to it. Where red swamps have an orange liver and it has a much sweeter flavor. So something with the seafood industry is that it's very cutthroat, unfortunately, and it's also very dishonest, I guess you could say. It's very easy to get away with being oh, this is gag grouper, when it's something else. And so same thing with shrimp, oh, these are Gulf shrimp, when actually they're imported. It's very easy to get away with those things. So there's a lot of people who do those things. Well, one of the things with crawfish that people do in Louisiana, like I said, nobody will eat white rivers. So sometimes they'll be separated, put in sacks, and then people that move crawfish out of state will come and buy only white rivers for pennies on the dollar, and then sell them like they're real red swamps. And nobody knows the difference. Up here, nobody knows the difference.
But if you were from Louisiana, you'd be able to tell.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, there's a lot of, unfortunately, shady things that go on in seafood, but it is what it is.
So one thing that I think people ask a lot if they're not familiar with crawfish, like me, because I've talked to some of my Louisiana friends at work, and everyone is like, what's the difference between crawfish and shrimp? Because they think that they're kind of similar, but they don't look similar at all. So what's the difference in, I guess, the taste? And
so, I mean, shrimp, you're a lot sweeter, especially Gulf shrimp, a lot sweeter. And then, with crawfish, the reality behind it is they live in the mud.
Right.
They live in the mud. And so when you boil them, if you were to just boil, obviously a shrimp in straight fresh water, it would still have a savory, sweet flavor to it. Something that you could drink white wine with, obviously, that is, it tastes good on its own. With crawfish, if you just boil them and pull them out, and that's a mistake that a ton of people make.
They just boil them, pull them out. Okay.
Right. A key to crawfish boiling is soaking them. You have to let them soak. You have to let them sink and soak up that juice, and that juice gets into the tail and into the meat. Where if you're just boiling them and pulling them, they're not going to taste good.
How long do you let them soak?
It all depends. It
Okay.
all depends. A basic rule of thumb is 20 minutes.
Okay.
And so, and again, another thing is people will boil them for too long. The big thing with letting your crawfish soak is that they can overcook if the water is too hot. And then they become mushy if they overcook, right? And so you have to, a lot of people will boil at a rolling boil for 5 minutes. It's way too long. 2 minutes, I would say, is pretty on the money there. At a rolling boil, you have to drop them in, let that water get back to a rolling boil, let it boil for 2 minutes, and then cut it off and let them soak. And so that's a huge thing with crawfish, but yeah.
And then you pull off the head.
That's right.
And then you dip it in anything, or you just
Well,
eat it?
some people. So it's funny. This is a big thing in Louisiana where people will argue. So you have I-10. I-10 runs across like above New Orleans, or kind of right through New Orleans, all the way to Baton Rouge, all the way to Lafayette, and then past Lafayette into Texas. Well, you have, and I guess I'm a little biased because I'm south of I-10, but basically the rule of thumb is south of I-10 are the real Cajuns. Those are the guys that they grew up in the marsh. They grew up in places like Plaquemines with more water than land. And really it's mostly of the people who lived off the fat of the land, as my dad would say. We hunted, we fished, and when we caught this, like, that wasn't like something that we threw in the freezer and we're just like, oh, like we'll eat that and never eat. We lived off that stuff.
Wow.
It was very much, our source of food growing up. That's what we did. And so, whereas in north of I-10, especially the west side of the state, so is mostly north of I-10, west side of the state, west of Louisiana, or the west side of Louisiana is pretty much Texas. And anywhere north of I-10. So these are the two big things. South of I-10, people believe in soaking their crawfish. They believe in not putting spice on the outside of their crawfish. And then north of I-10, and it really is like a line drawn, like it's like battle lines. Anywhere north of I-10, people believe in, they might still soak their crawfish, but they believe in putting like the boil seasoning on the outside of their crawfish. That is absolutely sacrilegious to us. To us, it's like basically what you're doing is you're adding like cayenne to the outside of the crawfish, where your lips are just going to burn, like all
Right.
get out, and the meat will still be bland. And so, yeah, I'm sure you get some mix of flavors, and I hate to say anything bad about it, because like I've tried it and it was all right, but it's very much one of those things that it's just the way it is. People south of I-10 believe in soaking their crawfish and not putting stuff on the outside, and people north just do.
So then you don't dip it in anything.
Well, so that's another thing, is like another north of I-10 thing I would say is making like crawfish sauce, which is, people make it in different ways, but it's pretty much like mayonnaise, ketchup, a little bit of Tony Chachere's or whatever kind of Cajun seasoning you like, some Worcester sauce, and I think some people even add some soy sauce to it, and mix that all up and dip their crawfish in that. And so,
And you're not one for that.
Not really. I think that if you know how to boil, you don't need any sauce. It's kind of like, perfect example is like somebody.
That was a mic drop moment. It's just like, if you know what you're doing.
Well, it's one of those things very similar to like adding like A1 to steak, to a good, like,
I was just gonna say, it's like a steak.
Yeah, or anything to trout.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't need to add anything.
If it's done well, you don't need to.
Trout.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And some people, just would prefer it, and to some people that's absolutely sacrilegious.
Mhm.
So it just kind of is what it is.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to talk about this wine, but I do want to. So I'm interested now, because I wonder what wine does pair really good with crawfish. Maybe we.
Well, you
should
said you
Google it
talked to your
really
sister.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. She's the wine.
Yeah, she's
Yeah.
definitely the wine person of the family. So she said any white, and in particular a rosé, also would pair well, pretty well. The thing with crawfish is obviously they're spicy. So I would defer to y'all more on what would go if there is a wine that goes with spicy food. But in general, that's what she said.
I could totally see a rosé, because rosé goes so well with so many things.
Yeah.
And I could, with the spicy, like, I completely agree with her. And I was just looking it up, and they actually say a Pinot Noir, because Pinot Noir is very friendly.
I would say Pinot Noir, or even a Riesling.
Lambrusco, Beaujolais, Albarino, Pinot Grigio, Sauvignon Blanc, which is what we have today, Champagne, and rosé is also on the list. So it's kind of nice, because that's actually quite a big selection of wines that would go. So today we have a Sauvignon Blanc that we're drinking, and you said you're not a big wine person, but
it's not that I don't. I actually like it. Like, actually, I think I had a glass of Malbec, if that's the right pronunciation.
Yeah, you did.
Last night, and so I do like wine. I just don't know a lot about it.
Yeah, that's totally fine. That's what we try to take a very unpretentious approach to wine. We kind of think like wine can be for everybody, and like you don't have to know a lot about it to like it, and you just like what you like and drink what you want to drink, and because there can be this a little bit of like snobbery that can kind of come with drinking wine. And we're all about, like, one of the things we've been saying since the beginning of starting the Nashville Wine Duo. I remember our first video we we compared wine to actually food, and we were like, you can go to a restaurant and pay like $200 for like this top-notch meal, but then you can also go to like a food truck or a carnival and pay like $10 for one of the best things you've ever eaten. And we feel like wine is really similar to that. So like you could spend a lot of money on a great bottle of wine, but we've had really great bottles of wine for 20 and under. So I think that people, just like you can't put a price on high quality food, you shouldn't put a price on high quality wine.
Absolutely.
And that's just the way we feel. And as we've been doing this, we have seen so many parallels between food and wine, and they go together, you know, and how things are grown and made, and the effort you put into it. And, you know, it's a level of farming that you do too, and taking care of the crawfish that you take care of. And, you know, there's a lot of thought that goes into it before getting into this final stage where someone is then devouring it in 5 seconds. And you're just like, wow, I spent hours of my life.
Yeah.
And then it's just gone. And that's a lot like wine. We talked to a lot of winemakers, and it's like, it's a dirty job, and it's really hard, and it's grueling, and like no sleep, and like, you know, all to make this product. And then it's enjoyed, and, you know, and but that's,
I think, you know,
cool.
I really think that's, for me at least, with crawfish, like that is the most enjoyable part of it all, is watching people eat them and then come and tell us like, wow, those crawfish were amazing. Those are the best crawfish I've ever had. Like that is just the biggest compliment that I can receive, because it validates all the work
what you're doing.
Yeah, it validates all the work we put into it.
Totally. So we're having a Sauvignon Blanc. This is called Bell's Vignes. It's a French Sauvignon Blanc. It's from Trader Joe's. It's got a twist top on the top. It's kind of a green bottle. It's got like a little fancy label.
It's definitely one of our favorite French Sauv Blancs from Trader Joe's.
For the price, I want to say it used to be around $6.99, but since inflation, everything's gone up about $2, so it might be $7 or $8.99 now.
That's not bad at all.
No, not bad at all. You know, I'm being like, I used to buy this for $6. But yeah, I mean, I love this wine, and it's got a lot of citrus. It's got like gooseberry notes with it. Very drinkable. What do you think?
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Again, like, you know, the flavor profiles I'm not so good on, but I like it. I'll tell you that.
I think it would be great with seafood.
I do too. I think it'd be really good with seafood.
Yeah, absolutely.
What else do you guys do on the truck?
So, you know, we've gained such a reputation with Bull Crawfish. It's one of those things where it's like, if it's not broke, why fix it?
Right.
You know, every now and then for holidays, we did the Craft Brewers Conference was pretty big for us, and New Heights Brewing, who we team up with, who allows us to set up the food truck there, they asked us to work more hours and boil shrimp. So we did boil shrimp that week, and they sold really well. So it's like, you know, why not? Let's maybe do it, you know?
Yeah.
But it's just, again, it's one of those things, you know, what not a lot of people, I guess, understand is like, it's not just the logistics of getting the crawfish up here, but it's keeping them alive. You know, while they're up here, I'm waking up every 3 hours to make sure that they stay wet. I'll just check on them. I'm like
babies.
Yes, I'm like a nervous mother. I'm like, are they okay? You know,
every 3 hours.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it's similar. Like, you know, I mean, I told you all I just had a son 7 months ago, and so you know, it's very similar to like I'd wake up to check on him and all that kind of stuff. You know, so I would actually, when he was still in kind of his not sleeping very well stage, I would wake up every 3 hours, check on the crawfish, and then go check on him, or vice versa, and make sure everything was okay. Again, the temperature of the van, you know, you don't want it to get too cold, you don't want it to get too hot.
Yeah.
You want to keep them in a dormant state so they're not moving around, they're not stressing each other out, all that kind of stuff. And when they're cold, they pretty much just you know, get comatose, but you don't want them too cold or else they're going to die. And so you want them in that just right temperature where they're going to stay comatose. They're not going to move a lot. They're not going to pinch at each other. And then when they warm up, and it's funny because I've been doing this for 6 years now, and every time I'm still scared when we pull the crawfish off and they're not moving a lot. I'm like, oh god. And then as soon as they warm up, they come right back to life. Yeah, they're fine. But we have customers say the same thing. They're like, they're not moving. I'm like, just give it 10 minutes, you know. And sure enough, you know, they'll text me and be like, oh, everything's fine.
So people will buy them like from you.
Correct. Yeah, they'll buy them live from us. And we do, you know, pretty much anything above 15 pounds. 15 pounds is our minimum, just because it takes a lot of time to weigh out, crawfish. If somebody wants 5 pounds and then you have a 35-pound sack, that's a lot of weighing.
Yeah.
So we ask people to order more than 15 pounds, but it's funny because in Louisiana, that doesn't even happen. Like, no one orders less than a sack.
Yeah, right.
Really?
You always just order a sack, because the cool thing about crawfish, and I think it, to incorporate, the wine with it, is that a crawfish boil is a social event. It is 100% a social event. So when I was a kid, like, everybody would have, we'd have a group of, let's say, 20 people, and each week another person would do the crawfish boil.
Mm-hmm.
And, so I'll do the crawfish boil this week. Next week, Luke will do a crawfish boil. And the week after, Nick will do a crawfish boil. And everybody comes over. And it's usually on Saturdays or Sundays. And yeah, you just sit around and you eat crawfish, and it immediately strikes conversation. When you're sitting around a table doing it, what I would consider the old school way of pouring it all out on a table, everybody comes at once and just sits around and talks and eats crawfish, drinks wine, drinks beer, whatever. It's a social event, also a little bit of a party as well, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And when the crawfish are done, you cut up, you play whatever, cornhole or whatever it is, and have a good time. And it's very much obviously part of the New Orleans culture too.
Right.
So I was going to ask, like, you still eat a lot of crawfish, obviously.
I do.
How was your wife taken to the crawfish?
She, being from St. Louis, and again, this is funny because it's like people who have had crawfish from people who may not know all the little tools and tricks to boiling, they don't like them, and so that was one thing with my wife. I had to convince her to, like, hey, try these, these are good. I don't know, they creep me out or whatever. Finally she tried one. She was like, wow, these are actually pretty good.
Nice.
It's like, haha, told you so. And so now she loves them. She loves them. She'll put down 3 or 4 pounds herself, which sounds like a lot of crawfish, but really, when you think about it, like the meat weight, and that's what I was going to say about shrimp too. That's one big difference, is shrimp has a lot more meat weight. A pound of shrimp will feed a person, whereas a pound of crawfish, like, that's nothing. That's probably only 2 ounces of actual meat.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So when are you going to give your son crawfish?
Thinking about that, I've taken some boil mix that we have and rubbed it on the inside of his lip. He didn't like that very much. It was a little spicy.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, soon enough. I think we'll wait until next season.
Yeah.
Just because he's so young. I think especially with my wife, she's so afraid of him choking.
Oh yeah.
And so that's our big concern there. So next year for sure.
Yes.
For sure.
So is the Nashville food truck industry, is it pretty competitive?
Not with crawfish.
Just in general. I mean, like, to find a spot or to find a place to kind of.
Not that I've seen. Again,
that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, so we're seasonal. We only operate during crawfish season, and so.
Which is from when to when?
So crawfish season in Louisiana, it'll start usually around January, sometimes even December, and then run until it ends a little earlier in Louisiana, because as the season gets later on in June and July, the crawfish get harder. Their shells get harder doing the molting thing that I was talking about. So their shells get harder and harder and harder, and people don't like to eat them in Louisiana. So it starts later in Tennessee and then ends later in Tennessee too. So people still want crawfish in June. And so we'll usually start Super Bowl weekend, which is whatever, second, third week of February. And then we'll run most of the time till the second or third week of June. Every year I say I'm going to make it till July 4th. And usually we're either burnt out by then or the demand has dropped. And so it's just not worth, doing all that drive.
So you only got about a month and a half left.
Yeah. I say thankfully. I mean, it's one of those things where I tell everybody this, it's a sprint. It's not a marathon. You have to understand. I mean, we put in easy 100-hour weeks every week.
Oh my God.
For the entirety of crawfish season, whether it be driving or figuring out numbers or catching or, we put in
so
a
then
lot
do you
of hours.
get rest during
off season?
Yeah.
You
do. Okay.
Yeah.
Because like that's like you're almost working the entire time.
Exactly.
The
Yeah.
whole year. Just
Yeah.
within that amount of period of time.
Yeah. So pretty much from, especially once we get the crawfish up, we're up somewhere between 3:30 and 4 o'clock in the morning and don't go to sleep until 9 or 10. And we get home and we go to sleep. It's not like you get home and you watch a show or eat dinner or whatever.
You're done.
Yeah. And it's very bad for your health. Cause like my wife's gotten on me cause I'm like eating a lot of fast food and stuff, just in between, running and gunning. And she's like, listen, you need to start eating a little bit more healthy or I'll start packing you snacks or whatever.
How often are you running back to Louisiana to?
So when we first started, I was doing all the driving, and that was extremely rough. And so basically we would do the trip in one day. I'd drive down 8 hours, pick up the crawfish, drive back. And so 17 hours of nonstop driving if you hit traffic, worse than that. And so that was the first 2 years, and that was terrible. And that's, like I said, when we almost gave up, I was like, this just isn't worth the work. And then we started, being able to hire a driver after our second year, where we started making a little bit more money. And it was like, okay, like we can actually hire somebody to drive them up for us. And so, that was when we started doing that, and that made my life a lot easier.
Yeah.
A lot easier.
Yeah.
And so he'll drive up once a week. And we catch 2 days a week and drive 1 day a week. And so we'll usually catch on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, drive on Thursdays, and then Friday and Saturday. And then Thursdays, we also deliver to restaurants. And then Friday and Saturday, we're doing our retail food truck.
Nice. And you pretty much just sell out.
Pretty much. I mean, it's so hard to gauge. And this is something that people, again, don't understand with crawfish. They get a little frustrated with us when we sell out. I'll never forget, like 2 years ago, it was our opening day for that season, and we sold out of, I think it was 600 pounds in like 3 minutes.
3 minutes?
3 minutes, yes. Like we had like 4 guys come and order like 50 pounds, 75 pounds, 100 pounds, all the boiled. And so then some lady showed up at like whatever it was. I think we opened up at 5. She showed up at 5:03 and we were sold out, and she was furious. She's like, this is ridiculous and whatever. And it's like what people don't understand with live crawfish, it's a living product. Imagine, I think for some people, they kind of can relate to it more if I would refer to it as like live lobster. Like if you don't use it, it's gone. You have to throw it away. So we have to be very careful on how much we bring up. And that's why a lot of people don't do crawfish, because you can lose an astronomical amount of money very fast if you don't sell out.
Right.
And so that's why we started doing the website, where you can order through the website, in advance. So we at least have a rough guess. All right, we got to bring up 3,000 pounds this week, or 3,500 or whatever. And then of course we always bring a little extra, especially for our boiled, because people like to just come and sit down and eat the boiled, and so kind of our rule is like, as far as live crawfish goes, you have to order in advance, every week by Wednesday at noon.
I think that's very fair.
Yeah. And I get it with people, because they're like, oh, well, it could rain, or the weather's, Friday, it could be bad. It could be good weather. Nobody knows. And it's like, and it tells you that on Wednesday at noon, and then you don't order, and then people call and are like, it's like, sorry, man.
I mean, I think if it's something that you really want, you're going to get it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's not like y'all are like on location in Louisiana with the ponds behind you, where you can just go,
Exactly.
like you're doing this, remotely. So it makes it very like, hey, got to do what's best for us.
Exactly.
And I think it makes sense.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, for the most part, I think people understand it. You always have some customers who, who I wouldn't say are difficult, but just get bummed out when they can't get crawfish. And I understand that.
Yeah. Just like in business, though, anytime you do something, like a business is doing something for a reason. Like we've learned from this mistake, so now we have to do this to like save ourselves. Or like, so yeah, completely makes sense.
Yeah.
So where is the truck going to be next? Tell us your kind of itinerary. Like, where do you usually hang out?
So New Heights Brewing, we like to just basically stay consistent every season. And so this past season, New Heights Brewing reached out to us, said, hey, we'd love to have you. And I said, great, as long as you're okay with us being there every Friday and every Saturday. And that's the deal. Like we have to come every Friday and every Saturday, because when you bounce around, then people, whoa, where are you this week? And we're so busy. Like, I mean, on Fridays, my phone starts blowing up usually around 4:00, and it's literally call after call after call after call. And that's just people trying to find us at a location that we're at every single week. And they still, whatever. I get it. You just don't, whatever. People don't pay attention to those kinds of things. And so I guess maybe with the assumption that we're a food truck, they think that we move, even though we don't.
Yeah.
So you're always at New Heights Brewing.
Always at New Heights Brewing for this season. Hopefully we'll be there next season. I haven't talked to New Heights about it. We haven't gotten into the intricacies of it necessarily. I know they mentioned that they would love to have us back, but we'll see. I know where we're at right now. There's a development company thinking about building something, because it's a really cool spot. We have a stage, sometimes live music. There's a big field, out in the sun for people to sit at, lots of tables, those kinds of things. And so it's a great spot for us. The question is when is this development company going to come in and build some kind of little shopping center there?
Right.
And then at that point, we'll probably be forced to move.
So have you heard which beer from New Heights goes well with your crawfish? Have people kind
We
of said?
talked about it. I personally think it's called Nothing Fancy, and it's basically their version of a light beer. I think light beers work great with crawfish as far as subduing the spiciness.
Mhm.
A lot of people, obviously, you eat crawfish, like spicy food, so they'll eat them. But then, to subdue that spiciness, a nice light beer, not necessarily an IPA, even though that's what I love.
Yeah.
I think the light beer is what works best. Any kind of light beer to pair with the crawfish. Yeah.
Nothing Fancy from New Heights with the crawfish.
Yep.
Gotta try it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you've been so fun to talk to, and I just gotta say, like, I don't know, I feel like you're a very super humble person, and I've loved your story, and I can tell you're just all about like family and tradition, and you work your butt off clearly. And I'm a working person. TJ's a working person in this world. I'd say we're very like blue collar working type people. And so we take pride in work. And I think that when we meet people that are the same way, that it's inspiring to meet people that work really hard for something that they feel is really important, and they give their whole heart into it, and they're doing it the right way. They're doing it ethically right. They're not lying. They're being truthful. And they really care about people. So
people and the product.
And I think you have to care about both of those things in order to truly have a successful business.
Yep.
So I just wish all the complete best for you, and I can't wait to try.
I have one final question.
Yeah, okay.
You don't sound like you're from Louisiana.
Oh yeah. I thought the
like
same
when you
thing.
said like I'm from Louisiana, I'm like, where is this accent?
Yeah,
like is that the below I-10 thing, or what is this?
No, it's not. Honestly, most people. So if you're from Louisiana, you know where Chalmette is. You may not necessarily know where Braithwaite is, just because it's that small. But I went to high school in Chalmette. All my friends, very, very thick accents. It's not so much of a Central Louisiana accent with like the rolling R's, kind of like a lot of people watch Swamp People, Troy, like his accent. It's not like that. The South Louisiana accent is almost, it sounds like kind of like New York, very yatty. So I actually went to high school in Kansas. It was a boarding school, and that's when my accent kind of like started drifting away. Oh. The only time it'll come back is if I've been drinking pretty heavily, and it just comes out naturally.
I'm gonna say let's hear this accent. Can you do a little improv?
Yeah, absolutely. So so hey, where you at, baby? Like, it's just I'm trying to think of like what phrases. A lot of people will say they hear it when I say New Orleans. New Orleans, New Orleans, not New Orleans, not New Orleans.
I can hear what you're saying about the New York kind of think thing. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, so and it's also, I think it's kind of the culture of Chalmette has a very unique reputation in New Orleans. So you have Uptown, you have Kenner, you have Metairie, you have all these different locations. Well, Chalmette is known as being kind of like the fisherman's, I guess you could even say, a little white trashy town. It's to the east of New Orleans, and it's right between where our crawfish farms are and New Orleans. And so it was the closest place for me to get a pretty good education. And yeah, they talk extremely different. I would definitely say like New York accent. But even then, like when I went to high school, people would make fun of me because they're like, "Dude, you don't really sound like you're from here."
Oh,
that's You know what though? You've met Briar at work.
Yeah.
She has no accent. She's from Louisiana.
I think it definitely depends on where you're from.
Yeah.
The Uptown New Orleans people don't have accents at all.
So I used to be in the music industry.
He's from Chicago. Could you tell?
Yeah.
But
he doesn't really have an accent.
But I managed a dude from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I went to visit him. We did a show down in Baton Rouge, and we went to the Bayou to pick up something. This guy was doing like merchandise. Picked up met a dude named Baby Duck. Baby Duck in the Bayou. I could not understand a word Baby Duck said.
Oh yeah.
It was this accent that
I've met someone too before.
And it was so thick, and I was just in this. Yeah,
it almost sounds like slang.
I'll never forget. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I will never forget it.
It's definitely got its own. There's different words. Like one of my favorites, beaucoup. Like I think it's a French word for like a lot. And we use in high school, like everybody said beaucoup.
Really?
Like, oh, we got beaucoup shrimp out here. Like they just like we're catching beaucoup crawfish, whatever.
Yeah.
Beaucoup. Everybody.
Okay, I'm gonna say this at work tomorrow around the Louisiana people and see if they'll laugh at me.
Yeah.
It was funny.
Oh, and then your name too. We have to make sure that people know how to pronounce it right because he says he gets it pronounced wrong all the time.
Right.
Yeah, every day. So a lot. It's usually with like emails and stuff when I'll be talking to a potential client, like a wholesale client or whatever. My email signature will be Carlin Perez, and a lot of people insert an O there and think Carolyn.
Yeah.
Happens all the time. And it's become kind of a joke. Like it's funny to me. I'll go walk in these meetings and they're expecting a Carolyn to show up and they're thinking it's a girl.
Not a Karen, a Carolyn.
Yeah. And so I'll walk in and be like, hi, how's it going? My name's Carlin. You can see the look of shock on their face. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm like,
hilarious.
It's no problem at all. I'm very used to it. It's funny. So the only reason I have that name, I guess, is my father was Shallon, my mom is Lynn, and then my brothers and sisters are Shallon, Kathleen, Sherry Lynn. So like I'm the youngest. I guess my parents were like, we're just gonna throw something together here that ends with Lynn, and came out with Carlin.
Wow, I like it. I've never met anyone named Carlin before.
First time.
Yeah. I'll say this: I've never met a guy named Carlin. I've met several girls named Carlin.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I like it.
I actually dated a girl in high school whose last name was Carlin.
Oh,
yeah, it's kind of weird.
She was like Carlin and Carlin.
Carlin.
Yeah.
All right, so tell people where they can find you on social media, all the.
So everything is South Coast Seafood TN.
Yep.
And so it's spelled out South Coast Seafood, and then obviously the abbreviation for Tennessee.
Yep.
That is our Instagram hashtag. That's our Facebook hashtag. Our website, southcoastseafoodtn.com. So everything South Coast Seafood TN.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, dude, it's been a pleasure having you
Absolutely.
on.
Thank you so much for having me.
All of our Louisiana people. We have a lot of Louisiana followers.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Bubba from.
Oh my gosh, yeah,
Bubba's
D.
from.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You know him?
Oh God, do I know him? So before like XM radio and all these things, I mean, he's been on the radio. I don't even know how long.
Forever.
But as a kid, I can remember in high school listening to him, and like that was the big New Orleans country station,
right?
Big B and Bubba.
Yeah.
And so we know him very well.
Yeah.
Not personally, but know of him very well.
He is Louisianan. Mm-hmm. He's supposed to be on our podcast someday soon. Bubba, do
talk
this.
To us about this.
Come on, we're having Louisiana people on here. So, but definitely, thank you, dude, for being on the podcast. Check out South Coast Seafood and follow them. And cheers.
Try the crawfish. Woo!